The night Matthew Carter finally collapsed on the factory floor, no one noticed at first. The machines were too loud, the fluorescent lights too harsh, and exhaustion had become his normal. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking not about himself, but about whether his 8-year-old son, Noah, had remembered to lock the door before sleeping. That was the moment everything began to change. Matthew had once been a respected mechanical engineer, the kind who loved blueprints more than boardrooms. But life didn't care about potential. 2 years earlier, his wife Hannah died suddenly from a brain aneurysm, leaving him alone with Noah and a mountain of hospital bills. Grief hollowed him out, and layoffs finished the job. By the time he landed a position at Hawthorne Industries, he wasn't an engineer anymore, just another supervisor working impossible hours for impossible demands. Hawthorne Industries belonged to Elizabeth Hawthorne, a billionaire CEO known across the city for her brilliance and ruthlessness. She was young, sharp, and relentless. Profits mattered. Deadlines mattered. People to her were replaceable parts in a massive machine. Matthew learned that quickly. For weeks, Elizabeth pushed his department beyond its limits. Double shifts, overnight fixes, weekend audits with no warning. Emails at 2 a.m. marked urgent. Matthew never complained. He couldn't afford to. Every paycheck meant food on the table, rent paid, Noah safe. But the cost was brutal. Noah started eating dinner alone more often than not. Parent-teacher meetings went unattended. One night, Matthew came home to find his son asleep on the couch, clutching a crumpled drawing that read, "I miss you, Dad." Matthew sat on the floor and cried silently so he wouldn't wake him. At work, Elizabeth noticed Matthew's results, but not his sacrifice. She saw numbers rising, efficiency improving, and assumed pressure was simply doing its job. When her board praised her for squeezing record productivity from the workforce, she nodded calmly, never asking how it was done. Then came the accident. Matthew hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in weeks. His hands shook as he adjusted a conveyor control panel. One wrong calculation, one moment of dizziness, and the system jammed violently. Emergency alarms screamed. Workers scrambled. Matthew was thrown back, hitting his head hard. He woke up in the infirmary, his head bandaged, his body aching. The HR manager stood nearby, expression tight. "Elizabeth Hawthorne wants to see you," she said. Matthew expected termination, maybe a lawsuit. Instead, he found Elizabeth standing by the window of her office, city lights glowing behind her like a crown. She didn't turn when he entered. "You collapsed," she said flatly. "That cost us 6 hours of downtime." "I'm sorry," Matthew replied quietly. "I'll make it up." She turned then, finally looking at him. For a brief second, something flickered in her eyes, confusion maybe. He looked terrible, pale, older than his years, not the image of a careless employee. "Go home," she said abruptly. "Rest, be back Monday." Matthew nodded, shocked, and left. Elizabeth stayed behind, unsettled. That night she reviewed his file out of curiosity. Widow, single father, no sick days taken, 90-hour work weeks, performance metrics off the charts. For the first time in years, Elizabeth Hawthorne felt something uncomfortable press against her chest. Guilt. But guilt didn't prepare her for what happened next. 3 nights later, unable to sleep, Elizabeth found herself driving, not to the penthouse overlooking the river but across town into a quiet neighborhood of aging apartments. She didn't fully understand why. She only knew Matthew's address and that his exhaustion had followed her home like a ghost. It was nearly midnight when she stood at his door. Matthew opened it slowly, confusion turning to alarm when he recognized her. "Ms. Hawthorne," he said, "is something wrong?" Elizabeth looked nothing like the polished CEO. No makeup, hair loosely tied. Her voice when she spoke was unsteady. "I didn't realize," she said. "I mean, I knew you worked hard. I just didn't know what it was costing you." Matthew said nothing. From inside the apartment, a small voice called, "Dad." Elizabeth's gaze shifted to the hallway, where Noah peeked out, rubbing his eyes. Something broke open inside her. "I'm sorry," Elizabeth said again, softer now. "May I come in?" They sat at the small kitchen table. Noah returned to bed after Elizabeth promised she wouldn't keep his dad too long. The apartment was modest but warm, filled with signs of love, school photos on the fridge, mismatched furniture, a sense of life being held together by determination. Matthew told her everything, not dramatically, just honestly, about Hannah, about Noah, about how he stayed awake through meetings by counting the hours until he could see his son again. Elizabeth listened, truly listened, for the first time in years. "My father built this company," she admitted quietly. "He taught me that weakness destroys success. I thought empathy was a distraction." "And now?" Matthew asked gently. She looked at him, eyes shining. "Now I think I forgot what success was for." That night changed more than either of them expected. The next week, Hawthorne Industries transformed. Mandatory overtime ended. Childcare support programs launched. Matthew was reinstated as a lead engineer, with flexible hours and a raise that made his knees weak. Elizabeth instituted policies that prioritized people alongside profit. Not everyone approved. Investors questioned her, executives whispered, but productivity didn't fall, it rose. Loyalty replaced fear. Elizabeth herself changed too. She began visiting departments unannounced, asking real questions. She learned names, stories. She learned how heavy leadership could be when you finally carried responsibility instead of hiding behind authority. Matthew and Elizabeth grew closer, slowly and carefully. She came to Noah's school play. Matthew helped her rediscover joy beyond boardrooms. They were two broken people learning how to stand upright again. Months later, as the sun set over the city, Elizabeth stood beside Matthew at a company event, watching employees laugh with their families. "You know," she said, smiling, "showing up at your door was the scariest thing I've ever done." Matthew squeezed her hand. It was the bravest. The message spread far beyond Hawthorne Industries. That success without humanity is empty, that leadership means seeing people, and that sometimes the greatest transformations begin not in offices, but at a quiet door at midnight.